Build Your Business listeners. This is Matt Reynolds, your host for the podcast, and you are listening to what we are calling the legacy episodes. And really, these are the pre-episodes that really led to this podcast, the Build Your Business podcast. This is really my life's work and my brother's life's work in building your business. And so they were originally published in the Barbell Logic podcast as part of the Principles or Coaching Success series, but really touch on similar topics to the Build Your Business podcast: how to improve your productivity, how to set and accomplish your goals, deprioritize urgent tasks, to focus on what is most important to you, and most importantly, to become a better person and leader and business owner overall. I'm proud to bring you these podcasts. Again, many years of life's work, several years of podcasts, and several decades of business ownership. Hope you enjoy them and learn from them. You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Barbell Logic podcast. This is Coaching Success with your guest host, Andrew Jackson, COO, Chief Operations Officer at Barbell Logic, exclusive coach and nutrition coach at Barbell Logic, as well as the product manager for TurnKey Coach, the coaching platform we've been developing over the last 4 years and are now releasing to you, the public, and coaches that are interested in improving their efficiency and the value that they can add to their clients. Matt asked me to record an episode this week with a version of the presentation I gave at the Barbell Logic Coaching Conference last year, specifically about lean principles as they apply to our coaching practice, and some concrete actions that we can all take as coaches to improve our workflow with the goal of adding more value to our clients. And I emphasize that point because often it's miscommunicated or misunderstood that lean theory or lean principles and efficiency improvements are about going faster, when really the goal is to eliminate waste so that you can add more value to your coaching practice or whatever workflow it is that you're applying these principles. Before I jump into the details, I want to give you a little bit of background for those of you who don't know me. First off, trained from an education standpoint in engineering. I was a computer engineering and computer science major in college. I then went into the Navy for 6 years as a nuclear engineer, which wasn't really what I would call engineering, but in terms of how the military describes engineering, we were really operating nuclear reactors. So I had to understand a lot of the engineering and physics and science principles behind how nuclear reactors worked, but I wasn't designing or engineering nuclear reactors. And then after 6 years in the Navy, I went into the corporate world and worked predominantly as an operations manager in high reliability electronics, aerospace, space, and medical implantable device manufacturing environments, where I was responsible for managing the day-to-day manufacturing of those products, as well as driving continuous improvement of those operations using predominantly lean principles or lean theory that has predominantly flown down through the generations of manufacturing from the Toyota production system. That's really kind of the birthplace of modern lean thinking, which emerged out of the Toyota Corporation over the last 100 years, I'd say predominantly in the 1900s. And the methods and processes that emerged from the Toyota Corporation in the 1900s spread rapidly through the automotive industry, particularly in the 80s and 90s, as many Japanese auto manufacturers started to compete heavily with U.S. auto manufacturers and kind of upset that market. It then spread into other industries across manufacturing, including aerospace, particularly in the 2000s. And we've even seen lean principles expand into service industries, hospitals, and just about any application you can think of, because the principles that drive lean thinking are universal. And so I'm going to talk to you about 5 of those principles. Depending on where you look, there are sometimes tens of principles, but there are 5 fundamental principles that I think most people agree are at the heart of lean theory. And I want to describe those in a way in which hopefully you can understand 2 things. One, the principles that I have used to develop and design TurnKey Coach, really to be the app I want to use. And 2, how you might be able to use those in your coaching practice to provide more value to your customers. Second, I'm going to talk to you about standardized work and how you can use that to objectively identify waste in your workflow and identify specific elements of waste so that you are able to produce more value in less time. So, first off, 5 principles of lean manufacturing. I'm going to go through identifying value, mapping the value stream, creating flow, establishing pull, and seeking perfection. First off, identifying value. This is something that Matt has been talking about in previous episodes, both in terms of the trust equation and then 3 things that we've really come to identify that correlate to ability, integrity, and benevolence that we hear specifically mentioned by our customers is form, programming, and support. So as we talk to and listen to our customers, what we're trying to do is identify what they value. And specifically, what is it that keeps them coming back and renewing their subscription month after month after month? In some cases, we have customers that have been with us returning for our service for over 7 years. And what they have told us, what we've been able to distill that down into are those 3 critical things. And being able to define concretely the value that our customers perceive and want to pay for helps us identify further on down the process what's waste and what's value add. By definition, value are those things the customer is willing to pay for. The classic analogy and example that is used in lean theory and lean teaching all the time is going to get your oil changed. If you were to drive into wherever you go to get your oil changed and saw a team, a fleet of people running around doing all kinds of things, getting tools, cleaning the floor, filling out paperwork, talking to their supervisor, taking a nap, taking a coffee break, fill in the blank, that didn't actually apply to changing the oil in your car, you wouldn't want to pay for that. You're only going to want to pay for the time that that mechanic is touching your car to actually drain it first, replace it, maybe replace the filter, whatever specific things that you recognize as being valuable to your vehicle. Everything else from your perspective as the customer is waste and should be identified as opportunity in your process to either eliminate it or make it more efficient and streamlined, maybe automated. We'll talk about that later, what we do specifically with waste. But the point being that the most important step is to make sure that you understand the difference between what your customer perceives as value and what they don't, because that's going to help you determine what to make sure you include in your process and what to remove. Second, you're going to map the value stream. So number 1, identify value. Number 2, map the value stream from the customer back to the beginning of the process. In manufacturing, this is pretty straightforward because you can go from the shipping dock all the way back to the supplier. And depending on how far you want to go into your value stream, you can go back to raw materials being extracted from the earth and being moved further and further along the value stream. Typically, a value stream map in a manufacturing environment will be done within the walls of the facility that you're managing. However, you can connect value streams or continue to pull back the thread on value streams, however far it's meaningful for you to be able to identify which processes are value add, non-value add, or potentially non-value added but necessary. The purpose in your coaching practice is to think about all of the things that need to be done in order to provide the value that we identified in step 1 so that you can ensure your process includes all of the steps necessary to be able to provide that value to your customer. It also, in the process of mapping the value stream, is going to enable you to identify all of the steps that you have opportunity to either add value or create waste. Both are possible, and there are ways to evaluate that process to determine whether it's value add or waste. But importantly, it's really helpful to visualize it and lay it out so that you can see whether it's physical processes like a manufacturing environment or transactional processes like most of your coaching probably is, especially if it's online. You are going to go through a series of transactional processes largely on your computer. Maybe if you're in a gym, though, doing a hybrid in-person online, there are going to be steps along the way in which you're going to have equipment ready. You're going to set that equipment up. You're going to have paperwork flows for your customer to fill out their questionnaire, complete their waiver, complete their check-in. All of these steps and all of the client communication involved along the way can be part of that process map. There are methods and standards for how these value stream maps can look, but it's really up to you in order to create the level of fidelity and detail that you need to be able to identify, again, importantly, what's adding value and what's adding waste. Now, once you've identified waste and mapped the value stream, you can go about creating flow. So once you know what the steps are from point A to point B of delivering value to the customer as defined from the customer perspective, you can then define your workflow ideally as a key principle in which work flows from one step to the next. Now, this is a good example of where we've really gone out of our way to develop very specific tools within TurnKey Coach to optimize flow. My goal as a coach, when I go in to open up TurnKey Coach, is to immediately go to my Connect page, open up my client's calendar, and start working through the inventory of work that I have from the previous work session in order to deliver coaching to my clients. So I've designed and worked with my development team to build the Connect page to enable me to move quickly through or efficiently through my inventory of work in a way that flows from one step to the next. And what do I mean by flow? Flow means that I can move from one step to the other without waiting, without wondering what I need to do next, without having to wait for a process to finish. The next element of work is automatically and instantaneously presented to me so that I know exactly what to work on without interruption and go directly into that next step. And I equate this to what most people are probably more familiar with thinking about from a flow perspective is being in the flow state. So a lot of athletes, for example, talk about that game where they're in the flow state. You might have hobbies or games that you play, or maybe you go out for a drive or a run, and you know that feeling when you're in a flow state. The reason that that's so powerful is that your brain is no longer interfering with itself. You are simply 100% engaged in the task. And that's when you're working at your best. Time disappears. You're no longer wondering, how much more work do I need to do? Am I doing a good job? You are entirely engrossed in the task. And that is the heart of flow. And that's really at the heart of what we're trying to do with TurnKey Coach is create a platform that enables you to stay in that flow state for ideally your Pomodoro duration. Some people prefer to work in 20 minutes segments. Some people work in 45. Some people will go an hour to an hour and a half. But typically it's going to be somewhere between 20 minutes and 90 minutes. That's how our brains are wired to be able to stay in deep focus. So we want to be able to create a tool and apply that lean principle of creating flow in our work and flow state from task to task. A concrete example of what we've done with TurnKey Coach to enable this is a built-in screen recorder that you can start directly from the app, create a picture-in-the-picture image of you reviewing their work that enables you to deliver high-value coaching, specifically programming. You can talk to their calendar while sharing your screen. Technical feedback, you can play their videos and coach their videos and give them cues. And then support. You can engage with them on a personal level. That built-in screen recorder also then allows you to, with a click of a button, automatically download a copy to your hard drive and instantaneously upload that video to the workout, collapse the workout, and open the next workout that you are intended to work on. All of this sorted in order by which your clients submit the workout. So you're able to stay in this flow state, and then moving directly into principle 4, establish pull. What is pull? Pull means that the customer is pulling work from you. We don't want to overproduce work. That's a type of waste. In old school manufacturing, before lean principles came into practice, there were often job shop mentality where you had the printing shop and the stamp shop and the cutting shop, and they would optimize for that function. So instead of building one product end to end in a flow state that was pulled by the customer, each production unit would try to optimize efficiency for their individual process. And that created typically large piles of inventory, which, if you know anything about business, inventory is cash, and cash sitting on the shelves not being used to deliver value to your customer is waste. Now, how does that translate to coaching? Well, in coaching, it can be very, very easy and seductive to spend way more time than you need to trying to add value to your clients so that you can demonstrate that you're doing something to validate that subscription or that reoccurring expense. But what we've designed TurnKey Coach to do is create a relationship between you and your client in which the client is pulling a discrete amount of work from you, in which you can then create coaching feedback that includes support, programming, and form feedback, all in one deliverable unit, specifically that video feedback. The clients are pulling with each one of their workouts, each one of their direct messages, and all of that is being managed from the TurnKey Coach Connect page. So I open up my work, I go to the top of the list, I can see the inventory of work that I need to do at the top of the page. It tells me exactly how many clients I need to touch base with today, how many workouts were completed, how many need programming attention, and how many have just left me a comment in their workout. So I can immediately see the inventory of work that I have. I can start to get into my flow state, chipping away one workout at a time based on what my customers are pulling from me. Now, the fifth and final step of the 5 lean principles is to seek perfection. And this is where principles lean theory gets a little bit of a bad rap because, unfortunately, as anybody who's worked in an environment where you're constantly seeking perfection, there can sometimes be a misunderstanding that you need to be perfect. But it's very clearly and importantly seeking perfection, not being perfect. We need to set the ideal of striving for perfection because that's what's going to constantly drive us to evaluate our value stream for waste and constantly look for ways that we can reduce the amount of time and energy that's not adding value to our service, and instead reinvest that time into adding more value to either that individual client or more clients, which is essentially allowing you to add more value to the world. So how do we constantly seek perfection? This leads me to the second presentation that I gave at the Barbell Logic conference this year, which is the concept of standardized work. Standardized work is a mechanism in which you can change your process for the better. So we've gone through and mapped this workflow, this value stream map, that includes in the middle of it something that you're doing as a standardized repetitive task. In our case, that's typically going to be the coaching feedback video that we're managing from the Connect page. And that coaching feedback video can be defined in a way that is standardized from start to finish what you need to do. Now, does that mean, we're not building the exact same feedback video for every single client every single time? However, I can define specific things that I want to make sure and touch during that workout so that I am adding programming support and form feedback to every single video without spending a bunch of time doing extraneous work that doesn't add value that I've defined is important to my customer. Again, This does not mean that every single video is exactly the same. It simply means that we have a standard by which we can measure against to determine whether we are deviating from a standard that we've defined as adding value, which typically means there's some sort of waste. Variation is often waste. Now, there's a normal distribution of variation. I can go down a whole different rabbit hole there, and there's an entire industry of lean manufacturing or Six Sigma projects that many of you have probably heard about that talk about eliminating variation, particularly from automated processes. However, in this small example, we're talking about defining a standard for repetitive work so that you can build from change for the better. Or in lean theory, it's typically referred to as Kaizen, but I just want to use normal words here as I'm talking to you. But we want to use standardized work in order to change for the better. Now, how do we do standardized work? Well, the key to standardized work is always going to come back to the observation, the time observation. So here's the call to action. Here's your takeaway. First, we need to define the pace at which you're going to work. In lean theory, this is called the takt time. And that is simply a math equation of the time you have available divided by the customer demand. So, for example, let's say I want to work 60 minutes a day and I have 19 workouts on average to review. That leaves me 3.15 minutes per workout. Now I have my pace or my takt time. I need to complete, on average, a standard amount of work in this video review that lasts about 3.15 minutes. Everything that I need to do for my clients, if I'm going to work for 1 hour and review 19 workouts, has to fit within that 3.15 minutes on average, or I'm going to do one of two things. Either I'm going to exceed my 60 minutes of time, or I'm not going to be able to support 19 clients. That opens up a whole nother conversation about how you want to manage your capacity and how many clients you can work with, but it's another powerful tool of standardized work in helping you try to understand and manage your personal boundaries and how much operational capacity you have to support your clients. So step one for standardized work, before you even start measuring anything, is to figure out what your pace needs to be. Second, you're going to observe yourself and determine what the standard elements of work need to be in order to deliver the value that you identified from our previous conversation. How do you observe yourself? Pretty straightforward. You put a camera on yourself, just like you record, most of you, that is, record your lifts or record your clients' lifts. You watch yourself coach over and over and over and over again. I would say at a minimum, you want to do at least 10 observations. At a minimum. The more you can do, the better, because the more data points you get, the more you're going to be able to see where variation is, and you're going to be able to see the consistent themes. Once you record your, let's say it's 10 observations, I need you to go back and actually write out step by step what it is that you do through each one of those iterations of recordings. So what, if you can, break it down into specifically the steps that you're doing. And this gets down to however much level of detail you want to go. At my previous company, we measured every single operational step down to the second. When I was building aerospace components, the nacelle that would go onto the 787 engine, we had a takt time. Our pace was about 20 to 24,000 seconds. So every 20 to 24,000 seconds, depending on the demand for that particular month, we had multiple playbooks that we'd shift around to. We would complete an entire nacelle. And we had a clock on the wall that would tick up to 24,000 seconds. And we had playbooks that for each operator, in many cases, it was somewhere between 15 to 18 operators that were all working on 24,000 second takt times or pace cycles. And they would be following their own individual work instructions at various stages of the product build. And that doesn't mean that they all built an entire nacelle. It means it took several steps, usually somewhere between 6 or 7 product moves, where each workstation had sometimes 2 to 3 people, depending on the amount of work content that had to happen in that 24,000 seconds. And we would measure how well the operators were keeping up with their workflow and move it along every 24,000 seconds with the goal of completing an entire nacelle in 24,000 seconds. Now, you fortunately have significantly less time. In the example I had, it was 3.15 minutes. So breaking it down into second by second steps and every single click that happens in the screen is actually not that hard. Every 3.5 minutes or 3.15 minutes, you can go through and see what the next video is made of. Breaking it down second by second, what are all the things you do? Literally, what buttons do you click? Where are you looking on the screen? What function are you performing? And ideally, what value are you adding and for how long in each step? Now, that can look like something relatively high level. Say, like for 30 seconds, I was queuing the bench. And for 15 seconds, I was commenting on something happening in the background to connect with the client. And then for another 30 seconds, I was providing feedback on the deadlift. But I missed something, so I had to go back and rewatch the deadlift. Now we've got something you can put an asterisk by as you're reflecting back on this in the future, because that, you might argue, is rework. You can decide whether you want to include that in your standard or not, but it's an opportunity potentially to identify opportunity to eliminate non-value added work from your standard. Again, that doesn't mean reviewing the video a second time is bad. It just tells you have to make a decision about whether you want to include 2 reviews or 1 review in your standard. So you go through your video reviews, you go through potentially there's 15 to 20, maybe 30 seconds of programming. And then maybe there's a 10 or 15 second send off where you're connecting with your client one more time. Now, as you've defined those elements and you continue to evaluate each iteration 9, 10, 15, 20 times, you will start to see a pattern emerge in which you can define the elements you want to include in your standard and for how long you want those to be in your standard. And now you've defined that 3.15. It needs to be at or below 3.15 seconds or minutes in the example that I've given, 60 minutes a day, 19 clients. And any deviation from that becomes an opportunity to identify waste, potentially. There's going to be some distribution, and that's going to be another conversation for another time about how to evaluate that distribution. However, if you're going to deliver 19 workouts in 60 minutes, the average has to work out to 3.51 minutes in the example that I've given. Now we have a standard by which we can revisit and try to identify ways to improve. Are there things that you're doing in that 3.15 minutes or in the standard that you've created that are not adding value? Are there button clicks? Is there administration work going on? This process is what I used to determine that implementing built-in screen recording was critical to the TurnKey Coach workflow. When I did time observations of several of our very experienced coaches, they were spending between 8 and 20% of their time managing the video upload process. So starting the video, stopping the video, renaming the video, downloading the video, uploading the video, copying a link, all of those things were impairing the ability to add value because there was no flow. Each one of those steps was an opportunity to get distracted. Each one of those steps was an opportunity to pick up the phone, for somebody to come in the room where they don't look like they're working, for them to think about something that has nothing to do with coaching, because the brain shuts off and goes into admin mode. Here's the deceptive part. Each one of those coaches felt like they were adding value because that was work. It felt like work. They were filling out forms. They were copying and pasting. They were doing things. And this is what's difficult about changing your workflow, is that it will often feel like there's no time. It will often feel like you are working hard the entire time. But when you step back and do observations, it will become clear that there is waste in the process. The analogy in lean theory and coaching is that you're lowering the water in a lake and the rocks start to show up at the bottom as the water gets low enough. And each one of those rocks is waste opportunity that you can start to pull out, and you keep lowering the water, the wastewater, draining the swamp, if you will, so that you can continue to identify and eliminate waste. All that to say is that you probably have opportunity, and you're not going to know until you observe yourself, look for non-value added and value added steps, And best of luck to you in trying to find a way to optimize that process. Without making it too much of a sales pitch, I will say that these principles and that approach, the 5 principles from the beginning that I mentioned and the standardized work, are how we've gone about developing TurnKey Coach in order to create the most lean and least wasteful, most flow, pull-based system that we can to enable you to add more value to your coaches and eliminate waste from your workflow. With another episode of Barbell Logic Podcast, Coaching Success, this is Andrew Jackson signing off.